Hi, I'm Samantha Hayes, 34, a compliance officer at a regional bank in the Denver suburbs. I've always been the quiet one in a family obsessed with appearances. My parents, Linda and Robert, and my older sister, Karen. I believed hard work and honesty were everything until everything fell apart. Standing under the cold rain outside the community clubhouse after the state regulator's inquiry, I watched my sister's HOA empire crumble before my eyes. No one in my family suspected I was the one who held the hammer over Karen's head. What I did next changed the course of all our lives in Evergreen Meadows. Growing up in the shadow of Karen Hayes wasn't easy. My sister was the golden child, charismatic, ambitious, and ruthless. Our parents fed her ego, praising her every HOA victory while dismissing mine as ordinary. When we both ended up in Evergreen Meadows, the picture-perfect suburban HOA with its absurd rules about lawn height, mailbox colors, and no visible trash cans, I thought finally we'd be on equal footing. I was wrong. Karen climbed the HOA ladder with dazzling speed, becoming president by 38. I took a different path, finding purpose in quietly tracking the association's finances as a volunteer board member while holding down my real job. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered. Every regulation I flagged protected homeowners from shady, spending, and manipulation. Every report I prepared strengthened the foundation of our little slice of suburban hell. My sister saw my work differently. Compliance is for people who can't hack it in real leadership. Sammy, she'd say loud enough for the neighbors to hear at block parties, her voice dripping with that fake sweet Karen tone. The sting of her words hurt, but I brushed them off. Family is family, I told myself, especially when the HOA fines for a single dandelion in your yard could bankrupt you faster than you could say petition. That November evening in 2022, when Karen showed up at my front door unannounced, her designer yoga pants wrinkled and her eyes bloodshot from whatever stress she claimed, I should have seen the warning signs. "Sammy, I'm in trouble," she said, collapsing onto my perfectly compliant porch swing. "I need $15,000 by tomorrow for the emergency reserve fund. It's just temporary. I made a bad call reallocating some dues. If I don't cover it now, the state regulators will notice." Her voice cracked. "Please, Sammy, I'd do the same for you." Would she, though? I wondered as I transferred the money that night from my savings. The gratitude in her eyes seemed genuine, and for a moment, I felt like the big sister protecting her for once. The check she promised never came. Weeks passed, then months. My texts went unanswered. When we did see each other at family dinners or those mandatory HOA potlucks, she'd squeeze my shoulder and whisper, "Soon, I promise." Things are tight with all these ridiculous complaints from the Karens. Wait, the other Karens. Meanwhile, I watched her buy a new Tesla, take her husband to Aspen for Valentine's Day, and upgrade her backyard to include a spa that somehow didn't violate the no above-ground pools rule she enforced on everyone else. When I finally confronted her after a particularly lavish Christmas HOA party, where she fined 3 neighbors for string lights being too festive, her charm vanished. "You'll never climb the board like me, Sammy. Just stay in your lane with your little spreadsheets." Her eyes were cold. "Nobody forced you to give me that money." The betrayal stung, but what hurt more was the realization that our parents would take her side if they knew. They always did. So, I buried the pain and focused on my work, determined to excel where I could. By early 2023, I was tasked with preparing Evergreen Meadows' annual compliance audit, a comprehensive report that would go directly to the state regulators. It was my chance to prove my worth, to step out of Karen's shadow. I worked nights and weekends meticulously documenting every transaction, flagging potential issues like mysterious transfers from the reserve fund, and recommending safeguards. What I discovered made my blood run cold. A pattern of irregularities, all linked to Karen's presidential decisions. Small discrepancies in reported dues collections, paperwork filed late or missing altogether. Homeowner fees moved between accounts with vague justifications like community enhancement that somehow paid for her new deck furniture. None of it was definitively illegal on paper, but together it painted a troubling picture of power abuse wrapped in HOA politeness. If the regulators investigated, the association could face substantial fines, possibly even dissolution threats or lawsuits from furious residents already tired of her petty citations for unauthorized flower heights. I documented everything, preparing to bring it to the attention of the full board. Then came March 1st. I stepped away from my home office desk for a quick coffee, leaving my report draft open on my laptop. When I returned 10 minutes later, Karen was leaning against my kitchen island, smirking like she'd just won re-election. You know, Sammy, you really should lock your computer when you step away. Security protocol and all that, especially with all these nosy neighbors. Something in her tone made my stomach drop. I checked my files. The report was gone. Not just closed, but deleted. The backup on my external drive, also gone. What did you do? I demanded, voice trembling. Did you really think I'd let you submit that hatchet job? Karen's voice was low. Dangerous. You're too sensitive, Sammy. It's just HOA politics. Everyone cuts corners to keep the fines flowing and the lawns perfect. If you can't handle that, maybe compliance isn't for you either. I stared at her, speechless. Weeks of work vanished. But worse than that was the betrayal. My own sister sabotaging me to cover her tracks while she lectured everyone else about community standards. You can't keep doing this, Karen. The regulators will find out eventually. She laughed. Actually laughed. The regulators only find what we show them. Remember that. And don't forget, I control what gets shown. I salvaged what I could, working around the clock to reconstruct my findings. The final report was incomplete, missing the specific evidence I'd gathered about Karen's enhancements, but was enough to satisfy the initial audit, or so I thought. 2 weeks later came the Evergreen Meadows annual gala at the Willowbrook Clubhouse, a lavish affair where board members showcased our successes to homeowners and partners. I wore a simple black dress, trying to blend into the background as usual. Karen, resplendent in a tailored power suit, commanded the room like she owned the subdivision. I watched from a corner as she charmed potential new residents, our parents beaming proudly nearby. This was her element, all flash and HOA dazzle. When the board chair invited department heads to say a few words, I was surprised to hear my name called after the major committees had presented a rare acknowledgement of compliance's role. I stepped forward, prepared to briefly discuss our regulatory safeguards. Before I could reach the microphone, Karen intercepted, placing a hand on my shoulder with that signature fake smile. If I may, she said smoothly to the chair. Since compliance falls under presidential oversight, perhaps I should address the recent audit situation. The chair, clearly caught off guard, nodded and stepped back. I stood frozen as Karen took center stage. As many of you know, we recently completed our annual compliance review. Her voice carried easily through the ballroom, laced with that condescending Karen charm. What you may not know is that we narrowly avoided a $500,000 regulatory fine thanks to presidential intervention. Murmurs rippled through the crowd of perfectly manicured neighbors. My face burned. My sister's department, she continued, gesturing toward me with theatrical regret, prepared a report so fundamentally flawed that it would have triggered automatic penalties. Fortunately, we caught the errors before submission. The room swam before my eyes. This was a complete inversion of the truth. She wasn't just taking credit. She was blaming me for problems her decisions had created. She's the reason we almost lost our good standing with the state. She concluded with a regretful shake of her head. But thankfully, we were able to correct course. Applause followed. Actual applause from people who'd been fined by her for parking their cars 2 inches over the line. I looked around the room, searching for anyone who might recognize the lie. Most avoided my gaze, but Emily Carson, our legal counsel on the board, watched with narrowed eyes, her champagne glass paused midway to her lips. I fled as soon as I could, stumbling through the exit and into the parking lot. Inside my 2019 Subaru Forester, I sat shaking, the engine cold and silent. In my purse was a folder containing fragments of my original report. Pages I'd printed before the deletion, evidence I'd managed to salvage. I clutched it now, tears blurring my vision. My phone lit up with a text from my mother. Karen explained everything. "We're disappointed. Samantha, you need to be more careful with your work." Of course, they believed her without question. I called them later that night, desperate to defend myself. "Mom, Dad, this was Grandma's last gift to me. My chance to make a real difference in this HOA nightmare." Karen is lying to cover up her own mistakes. My father's voice was cold. "Karen has always looked out for the neighborhood. Samantha, maybe instead of blaming her, you should thank her for saving you from embarrassment." That night, as I lay awake in my perfectly compliant home, something broke inside me. The good daughter, the responsible sister, the reliable Samantha who played by every absurd HOA rule. She died. In her place grew something harder, colder, and infinitely more determined. I swore I wouldn't be their scapegoat anymore. What my family didn't know, what no one knew, was that HOA compliance wasn't my only talent. Since 2021, I've been quietly consulting for Cascade HOA Technologies, helping them develop financial tracking software that exposed exactly the kind of creative accounting Karen loved. My name appeared nowhere in their public materials. I was simply SR Consulting. The arrangement had netted me nearly $1.8 million in stock options and consulting fees, all carefully invested. I never told them about my silent partner's stake in 3 local coffee shops that had become hotspots for homeowners dodging Karen's no outdoor seating fines. My initial investment of $50,000 from Grandma's inheritance, the one my parents thought I'd wasted on rent instead of property, had tripled in value. And then there were the patent royalties. In my spare time, I developed compliance software that automated regulatory checks for HOAs just like ours. A small firm in Seattle had licensed it 2 years ago, generating steady passive income that I funneled directly into investments. On paper, I was a mid-level compliance officer making $85,000 a year and a quiet HOA volunteer. In reality, my net worth approached $2.3 million. Financial security gave me freedom my family never suspected I had, the freedom to finally fight back against the dictatorship disguised as community standards. The morning after the gala, I called in sick. Instead of going to the bank, I drove to a small coffee shop across town, far from any HOA eyes, and opened my laptop. With methodical precision, I began documenting everything. Screenshots of system logs showing Karen accessing my computer on March 1st. Recovered fragments of emails where she discussed fixing the compliance issue with her inner circle. Financial records showing the patterns I'd originally flagged, including transfers that paid for her community enhancement spa. I even had a recording from a board meeting where Karen had casually mentioned massaging the numbers for certain projects while finding misses. Henderson next door for her garden gnomes being too whimsical. None of it was enough to bring her down on its own, but together it painted a damning picture of a Karen who preached rules by day and stole from the reserve fund by night. Oh, the black humor in it all. Here was the woman who once cited me for excessive curb appeal with my one extra rosebush, while she siphoned dues like it was her personal ATM. On March 20th, I met with a lawyer at Morrison & Associates, a firm specializing in HOA law. I paid their consultation fee in cash. MS. Hayes, the attorney said after reviewing my documents, what you're describing could constitute fiduciary fraud. If you take this to the regulators, your sister could face serious consequences, fines, removal from the board, even civil suits from homeowners. And what about me? I asked. I sit on the same board. My name is on some of these reports. Whistleblower protections would likely apply, especially since you can prove your original findings were suppressed, but there's no guarantee. This could end your volunteer role and strain family ties. I nodded slowly. I understand. What I didn't say was that I was counting on it. Back in the neighborhood, I maintained a perfect facade. I smiled at Karen during the next board meeting, accepted my parents' constructive criticism about being more careful with your little reports, and quietly did my job. No one noticed that I stayed late most evenings, meticulously gathering evidence and building my case while Karen patrolled the streets in her golf cart, ticketing anyone whose trash bin was visible for more than 8 minutes. Emily Carson, our legal counsel, caught me printing documents after hours one night at the clubhouse. "Working hard or hardly working?" she asked, leaning against the door frame with a knowing smirk. I forced a smile. "Just catching up." She studied me for a long moment. "You know, I've been reviewing the compliance reports from the last 3 quarters. Interesting patterns emerging." My pulse quickened. "Oh." She stepped closer, especially in certain presidential portfolios. Almost as if someone's been creative with the numbers. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I knew she knew. The question was, whose side was she on? "Hypothetically," she continued, voice barely above a whisper, "if someone had evidence of such creativity, bringing it to the right people could be quite impactful." I held my breath. And who would the right people be? Hypothetically. A small smile played at her lips. "Not the ones currently reviewing your work, that's for sure." She slipped a business card onto the printer. "My personal cell is on the back, in case you ever want to discuss hypotheticals." As she walked away, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought in this HOA hellscape. April arrived, bringing news that Karen's daughter Vanessa had gotten engaged to some trust fund kid from the next subdivision. The engagement party was set for April 22nd at the Hamilton Plaza Clubhouse, one of the most exclusive venues in Evergreen Meadows, complete with champagne fountains and approved floral arrangements that cost more than my monthly dues. My invitation arrived in a cream-colored envelope. Karen's messy scroll adding, "Don't be late, or you'll get cited," below the printed details. Perfect timing. The night before the party, I could barely sleep. Everything was in place. The evidence compiled, the presentation prepared, the regulator contact information saved in my phone. I'd chosen my weapon carefully. Truth delivered at the moment of her greatest triumph. The morning of April 22nd dawned clear and bright. I spent hours getting ready, not in my usual rushed manner, but with deliberate care. Hair salon at 9 o'clock, manicure at 11 o'clock, and at 2 o'clock I picked up the dress I'd splurged on. A navy blue designer gown that cost more than my monthly HOA fees. The kind of dress my mother would approve of, if only she knew I owned it without her golden daughter's help. I arrived at the Hamilton Plaza precisely on time. The crystal ballroom was transformed, dripping with white flowers and twinkling lights that somehow passed Karen's no excessive sparkle rule. A champagne fountain burbled in the center, surrounded by elegantly dressed guests congratulating the happy couple while whispering about whose lawn was greener. Karen spotted me immediately, her eyebrows rising in my unexpected glamour. "Well, someone cleans up nice for once. Must be all that compliance money." I smiled, the expression not reaching my eyes. "I wouldn't miss this for the world, sis." Our parents hurried over, my mother's critical gaze sweeping over my appearance. "Samantha, that dress must have cost a fortune. Please tell me you didn't put it on credit." "Don't worry, Mom. I can afford it." She exchanged a look with my father that clearly said they didn't believe me. For the next hour, I circulated, sipping champagne and making small talk. I complimented Vanessa on her enormous diamond, the one probably bought with misallocated dues. I laughed at the right moments during the best man's toast about keeping it in the family. I posed for family photos, smiling until my cheeks hurt, all while the black humor bubbled inside me. Here we were, celebrating love in a neighborhood where Karen fined widows for emotional support, pets being too loud. At precisely 8:30, as scheduled in the evening's program, Karen took the stage for her special announcement. Everyone expected her to thank the guests, maybe share an anecdote about how she met her son-in-law-to-be while enforcing parking rules. Instead, as she tapped the microphone, the lights dimmed unexpectedly. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd of HOA elites. "What's happening?" she asked, squinting into the darkness with that signature Karen panic starting to creep in. A projection screen lowered behind her, and the room fell silent as text messages appeared. This doesn't count as misuse. It's community enhancement. Read one from February 25th, sent to her after I'd questioned a transfer. Emails followed, screenshots of files being deleted from my drive, financial records with clear discrepancies, all bearing her digital signature. Karen spun around, her face draining of color as she saw what was displayed behind her, the very proof of her years of leadership. What is this? Turn it off. But the presentation continued, methodically revealing every shortcut, every manipulation, every lie she'd constructed over the past year, while citing neighbors for non-compliant holiday wreaths. The finale was a recording, her own voice at a board meeting. The regulators don't need to know every little detail. What they don't know won't hurt the association, right? As the lights came back up, I stood and walked slowly to the stage, every eye in the room following me. The heavy silence was broken only by the click of my heels against the marble floor. Here's the truth behind the $500,000 regulatory fine Karen tried to bury and why Evergreen Meadows is safe now, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Every document you just saw has been verified, every discrepancy confirmed, and as of this afternoon, every piece of evidence has been submitted to the state regulators. Karen lunged for the microphone. This is fake. Photoshop doctored files. Her perfect composure had shattered, revealing the desperate HOA dictator beneath. She's lying. She's always been jealous of my position. Our mother stood frozen, her face transitioning from smug confidence to stunned silence. Samantha, my father moved forward, reaching for Karen's arm. Daughter, let's talk privately. But it was too late for damage control. The murmurs had grown to a buzz, guests exchanging shocked glances and hurried whispers about all the times they'd been fined while Karen lived large. I corroborate every claim she made. The clear voice cut through the chaos. Emily Carson stood near the back, her expression calm and professional. As legal counsel for the association, I've reviewed all evidence MS. Hayes has presented. It's authentic and deeply concerning. Vanessa, who had been watching the scene unfold with increasing horror, slowly removed her engagement ring and placed it on the champagne table beside her. I need some air, she murmured, avoiding Karen's desperate gaze as she walked toward the exit. I hadn't planned what to say next in my fantasies. This moment had always ended with Karen's humiliation, but standing there watching my family's carefully constructed facade crumble, while neighbors who'd suffered her rules now stared at her with dawning realization, I felt strangely hollow. I trusted you, I said simply, looking at each of them in turn. All of you, and you threw me to the wolves to protect her. With that, I turned and walked out, leaving behind the wreckage of the life we'd built on lies and perfectly mowed lawns. The satire of it all hit me later. The same woman who once told me my rosebush was a threat to property values, now exposed as the real threat to everything. The next week passed in a blur. Karen was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Our parents called incessantly, alternating between begging me to recant and threatening legal action if I didn't. Classic HOA family drama, where appearances trump truth. I blocked their numbers. Emily Carson became my unexpected ally, guiding me through the process of formal whistleblower protection and ensuring my position on the board remained secure, at least on paper. We both knew I wouldn't stay. On May 1st, the regulators filed their lawsuit, $500,000 in penalties against Karen personally for fraud and misrepresentation. Evergreen Meadows escaped with a warning, thanks largely to my evidence and cooperation. And Karen's fall was swift and merciless. Her loyal followers abandoned her. Her reputation in the subdivision plummeted. Nextdoor app filled with thinly veiled references to certain presidential portfolios. The whispers that had once worked in her favor now worked against her, neighbors finally voicing years of resentment over arbitrary fines for non-approved flagpoles while she skimmed dues. The worst blow came on June 15th when our parents filed for divorce. The stress of the public scandal had exposed fractures in their marriage that had apparently existed for years. My mother moved to Phoenix to live with her sister. My father retreated to a cabin in Montana, refusing all contact. Meanwhile, I quietly resigned from the board, declining the promotion they desperately offered to keep me quiet. Instead, I expanded my consulting business, officially launching Cozy Compliance LLC with seed money from my own investments, specializing in software that actually protects homeowners from Karens like my sister. By July, I was ready for a fresh start. Seattle welcomed me with misty mornings and the promise of anonymity. No more HOA patrols, no more ridiculous rules dictating my life. My downtown apartment overlooked Elliott Bay, a daily reminder of how far I'd come from the shadow of my sister's iron-fisted presidency. Karen eventually found work as a junior committee chair at a small condo association in Ohio, a humiliating step down from her suburban throne. She sent one email after her hire. "I hope you're happy with what you've done." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I thought revenge would feel sweeter. In movies, the wronged heroine walks away triumphant, validated by justice served. Reality is messier. Yes, Karen paid for her betrayal. Yes, our parents finally saw the truth about their golden daughter. But the victory left scars on all of us, permanent reminders of how thoroughly we'd failed each other as a family. Scars deeper than any HOA citation. Some nights, I still dream about standing in the rain outside the clubhouse after the regulator's hearing, watching Karen emerge with her head bowed, defeated in the dream. She looks up and sees me, and there's a moment of recognition, not of me as her sister, but as the architect of her downfall. I wake from these dreams, not with satisfaction, but with a strange, quiet resolve. The Samantha who believed in unconditional family loyalty is gone. In her place is a woman who understands that respect must be earned. Trust must be reciprocated. And sometimes the greatest act of self-love is walking away from the perfect lawns and into real freedom. My new circle in Seattle knows nothing of the Hayes family drama. To them, I'm just Sam, the compliance expert with an uncanny knack for spotting HOA financial irregularities. My growing client list includes tech startups and established associations alike, all drawn to my reputation for thoroughness and discretion. It was at a business conference in Vancouver that I met James Patel, a cybersecurity specialist whose presentation on financial data protection captivated the audience. When he asked me to coffee afterward, my first instinct was caution. The lessons of betrayal die hard, but something in his straightforward manner disarmed me. "I've read your paper on automated compliance checks," he said as we sat in a corner cafe. "Brilliant stuff. Most people focus on catching violations after they happen. You're preventing them entirely." For the first time in months, I felt seen for my work, not for my family drama. Our conversation flowed easily from professional interests to personal philosophies, carefully skirting the past I wasn't ready to share. As autumn painted Seattle in gold and crimson, James and I developed a tentative romance. Coffee dates that turned into dinners, professional collaboration that evolved into genuine connection. He never pushed for details about Denver, seeming to understand instinctively that some stories need time to be told. On a rainy November evening, almost exactly a year after Karen had asked for that fateful loan, I received a certified letter. Inside was a check for $15,000 and a brief note. "This doesn't change anything, but it needed to be done." No signature, but I recognized Karen's handwriting. The check cleared the next day. I donated the entire amount to a financial literacy program for young women in HOA-trapped neighborhoods. It felt right somehow, transforming that painful transaction into something that might prevent others from finding themselves in similar situations. That night, I called James and told him everything. The golden sister, the stolen report, the carefully orchestrated revenge at the engagement party, the absurd HOA rules that masked her greed. I expected judgment or at least surprise. Instead, he listened quietly, his expression thoughtful. "You know what I find remarkable?" he said finally. "Not that you brought her down, but that you waited so long to do it. Most people wouldn't have shown that restraint. It wasn't the reaction I'd expected, but it was exactly what I needed to hear. Not absolution for my actions, but recognition of the complicated truth behind them. The black comedy of a Karen who ruled with fines and fear until her own empire of lies collapsed in front of everyone she'd ever cited. The story of the Hayes sisters made brief headlines in local news and HOA forums, then faded into obscurity like most scandals eventually do. Karen remained in Ohio, slowly rebuilding a career that would never reach its former heights of suburban tyranny. Our parents drifted further apart, connected only by occasional holiday cards and the shared knowledge of how thoroughly they'd failed both their children. As for me, I built something unexpected from the ashes of my old life. Not just financial success, but a sense of peace I'd never known in Evergreen Meadows. My work expanded. My relationship with James deepened. I made friends who valued me for myself, not for my relation to the former HOA queen. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Karen had never destroyed my report. If our parents had believed me just once, if I'd spoken up sooner or found another way to address the fraud without destroying my family. But such questions lead nowhere. We made our choices, all of us, and now we live with the consequences. The truth about revenge is that it doesn't heal the original wound. It simply creates a different kind of scar. Cleaner perhaps, but still permanent. The satisfaction fades. The pain dulls. What remains is the person you've become through the process. I'm not the same Samantha who sat shaking in her car outside the Willowbrook clubhouse. That woman still believed in family above all, still hoped for approval from people who would never give it freely. The woman I am now understands that true strength isn't in tearing others down, but in refusing to let them define you. The revenge I took against Karen was necessary. It exposed real fraud and protected homeowners from harm. But the real victory wasn't watching her fall. It was walking away and building something better, far from the ridiculous rules that turned neighbors into enemies and sisters into strangers. Last week, I received a text from Emily Carson. Still on the board after all this time. Thought you want to know. They're renaming the compliance department, the Hayes Standards Division. I laughed out loud when I read it, startling a seagull perched on my balcony railing. The irony was almost too perfect. Which Hayes? I texted back. Her response came immediately, the one who got it right. Maybe that's all the vindication anyone really needs in the end. Not revenge, but recognition. Not destruction, but the chance to create something true and lasting. I still have the fragments of that original compliance report tucked away in a folder I rarely open. Not as a trophy or a reminder, but as evidence of a turning point, the moment when being right became more important than being liked. When truth outweighed family loyalty. When I finally understood that some bridges and some HOAs need to burn for new ones to be built. Karen's betrayal taught me that family can be your greatest weakness, but its aftermath showed me something more important. That chosen connections, built on respect and mutual support, can be your greatest strength. The rain is falling again in Seattle tonight, gentle and cleansing. From my window, I can see the city lights reflecting on the wet streets. Each one distinct, yet part of a greater whole. They're the metaphor there, I think, about individual choices creating collective patterns, about small betrayals leading to larger consequences, about the interconnectedness of our actions. Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe it's just rain on pavement, and I'm just a woman who finally found her own path after years in someone else's shadow. Either way, I'm at peace with the journey, and that perhaps is the greatest revenge of all.